Well, brothers and sisters, we find ourselves in the middle of the first full week of 2021. And if you had any hopes of this year being more peaceful and comforting than the last, I trust that those hopes have been dashed with the events that have unfolded in these last couple of days and the political chaos and turmoil that our nation finds itself in. And perhaps you find yourself this week and this day feeling quite weary with it all. I was thinking this morning as I was sensing myself that weariness of what a great blessing it is that God gives us the weekly Sabbath day, a day to rest, a day to renew our minds in His Word, a day to have our hearts recalibrated in the midst of a world that is constantly seeking to turn our hearts away from the Lord and the things of the Lord. And we have the privilege of gathering this coming Lord's Day and of hearing God speak to us. This past week, God spoke to us from Romans chapter 7, verses 14 through 25. We saw there Paul's struggle with the remaining corruption within his own heart, speaking as a Christian man. And we saw there how God uses remaining sin in the hearts of believers to promote the downward disposition of humility. And this week we're going to be looking at another familiar passage, 2 Corinthians 12, verses 7 through 10, where Paul speaks of this thorn in the flesh that had been given to him. And we're going to see that God not only uses sin in the lives of believers to humble us, but He also uses suffering to humble us, both sin and suffering. And so this coming Sunday, we're going to be exploring the theme of suffering in Paul's autobiographical passage there. And we're going to be seeing how God uses suffering to deliver us from ourselves, to deliver us from haughtiness. I've been reading recently in my personal devotions John Flavel's treatise on keeping the heart. If you're looking for something good to read, something that will challenge you spiritually, I strongly encourage this to you. You can find it in the 5th volume of his collected writings, and they've also published it in the Puritan paperback series. So it's a smaller volume that's been modernized. So you can get a copy of it for, I don't know, $6-7. I really encourage you to check it out. But Flavel has been impressing upon me as I've read this the absolute necessity of keeping the heart diligently, as God calls us to in Proverbs 4:23. And so that is something that we're called to at all seasons and at all times of our lives. But Flavel says that there are particular seasons of life in which we need to be especially watchful over our hearts. And the first such season that he mentions is times of prosperity. Now, when I read that earlier this week, it struck me. It was striking to me that Flavel would pick prosperity as the very first time in which we need to be especially watchful of our hearts. Here's what he says. He says that in the time of prosperity, when providence smiles upon us, it is in this time that we are exceedingly apt, we're exceedingly prone to grow secure, proud, and earthly. He goes on to say, to see a humble man under prosperity is one of the greatest rarities in the world. And we're going to see that more this coming Sunday. And I'm going to use Israel to illustrate that. When things are going well, when we're prospering spiritually, when we're prospering physically, when we're prospering financially, we have the tendency to become puffed up. We have the tendency to become haughty. We have the tendency to think that we're really something great. Kids, I want you to imagine for a moment that you are on a basketball team. Maybe you are on a basketball team in real life, but this basketball team is a really good basketball team. They are winning game after game after game. In fact, they are undefeated champions. Now, as you win game after game after game, let's say you're even the star player on the team, what is going to be the tendency of your heart? The tendency of your heart is going to be puffed up, to think, wow, I'm pretty great. I'm pretty awesome. Man, no one can beat us. That's what Flavel is talking about here. When we're succeeding, when we're prospering, when we're winning every game, that's when our hearts are most prone to be lifted up with selfishness and pride. It's when we're most prone to lose a Godward self-perception and the lowly spirit that brings about. And what God does in his wisdom and in his kindness is that sometimes he causes us to lose. Sometimes he causes us to break our legs so that we end up being benched for the rest of the season. Because he knows if we just got victory after victory, success after success, prosperity after prosperity, comfort after comfort, he knows what that would do to our hearts. We're going to see this with Paul. God inflicted Paul, and he did it to keep him from being lifted up with pride. And so, as we prepare ourselves for the preaching of the word this coming Sunday, I want you to be thinking about what happens to your heart. What is the natural tendency of your heart in comfort, in ease, in prosperity, in peace? And why is that so dangerous? I think it's particularly fitting in the midst of the political chaos in which we find ourselves to consider these things. I'm not going to be applying my message specifically to the broader culture and political scene, but as we think about the church in America, for hundreds of years, the church has experienced prosperity and peace and ease and comfort in our nation. And with the events that continue to unfold, it seems that comfort and that ease and that freedom is being quickly eroded at the very foundations. And how might God be using that discomfort, using that turmoil to make us humble, to bring us to the end of ourselves, to deliver us from our pride and our haughtiness? I want you to be thinking about these things. We're going to see much more of this in the preaching of the word this coming Sunday, and see how God tailors suffering, both small suffering in our everyday lives and big suffering, tragedies. He tailors these things to produce within us the downward disposition of a Godward self-perception. Let's be continuing to pray that God would do that in us through his word and by his Spirit. I look forward to seeing you this coming Sunday.